Morality. When we speak of morality, we usually mean the institutional enforcement of a code of ethos, which is projected as some universal law. The universality of the law is either placed upon some supernatural entity, such as a god, or upon some ambiguous rule of nature, which can never be defined nor explained, but is considered self-evident. A closer look at nature and other species reveals the fallacy of these positions. What we call moral behavior can be observed in all species, and all of them are social creatures. I should correct that. This behavior can be observed in all social species, particularly of the higher kinds, such as mammals. Moral behavior is a necessary evolutionary trait to enable cooperatives or cooperative social structures such as wolf packs and lion prides and herbivore herds. It is an expression of compassion or sympathy towards an otherness, one which is similar to the conception we have of ourselves. So our compassion is really directed towards ourselves via the other, in whom we see traits we see in ourselves. Self-knowledge is therefore an important determining factor in the direction and the force our sympathies take. It evolved this self-sacrificing, risky behavior so as to increase survivability. When the organism comes to the aid of one of its own kind, of one that belongs to its group, it ensures in this way that this other will then most likely come to its aid in its time of need. But there's another factor at work here, which also explains self-sacrifice and the parental instinct. I already mentioned it. It is the factor of self-knowledge or self-awareness or self-identification. The more of a developed sense of self the organism has, the more precise its association with otherness and of the alien otherness in particular. Superficial similarities may be enough for the lesser mind, but a higher mind requires more details, as its mind is built on more sophisticated mental models. The level of self-awareness, the depth of self-knowledge, determines the mind's then association with an otherness. Because consciousness precedes self-consciousness, the latter is a subsequent development of the former. Ergo, at the moment of its developmental immaturity, it can be redirected, if not stunted completely. For example, a mind might be made to identify self with God or with another abstraction, such as that of a nation state, or even something more abstract, such as an ideal or an idea. Such a mind will grow to associate self with this external to it abstraction, to such a degree that it will sacrifice the biological self from which this consciousness emerges to this ideal or idea. I think that this behavior is an alteration of an evolutionary social instinct. You see, in mammalian groups, the participants share common genes. Often a dominant pair or a dominant male will father most of the group's offspring. In some species, all of them. By evolving this association of self with otherness within the group, and based on sensual similarities of appearance, smell, sound, form, color, etc., the non-reproducing inferior members of the group ensure their participation within the group as surrogate parents, and in this way they help to propagate the shared genes. In some species, this participation also increases most often in males or with males, the potential to garner sexual favors from the females in the group by playing the nice guy role, by bringing them food, by babysitting the female's offspring, and so on. In the parental instinct, this self-sacrificing instinct is easier to understand. The mother or father sees in the offspring a part of itself. The similarities overpower the differences, due again to the intoxicating effect of the sexual drive, which now takes on a more subdued form while retaining its intensity. The same sexual madness that males go into, that sexual frenzy of the rut season, where they risk life and limb for an opportunity to copulate with the females, and the females takes on a more sedate, motherly, parental instinct when it comes to their offspring. Sometimes this same feminine behavior can be redirected towards an adult male. I will not get into it in detail, but in my opinion, this heterosexual sexual drive is a development of the feeding instinct. Copulation takes on many of the aspects of feeding, like the feeding frenzy, biting, scratching, and so on. In mother-child relationship, this morphs into a more tender exchange of nutrients. Kissing is a part of this process. Also, they later to develop infatuation with the mammary glands, as it is seen in human males. The male wants to figuratively devour the female. The penis becomes a stabbing tool, penetrating the female, possessing her. The female in turn wants to be devoured by the male, again figuratively, become a part of him, if she is of a more feminine disposition. If the masculine side in her is stronger, then she wishes to absorb the male into her body through her vagina. But enough of that talk. This isn't much of a redirection, but back to morality we go. What we call morality is not a behavior exclusive to humans. Humans, like all social mammals, exhibited the same compassion, the same sympathy towards their own kind before man evolved to the point where he could then encode this moral sense into laws. These laws were meant to establish a primitive form of social etiquette. Most then were illiterate and vulgar, and they required simple, direct rules to govern their behavior and to prevent them from abandoning themselves to their true nature. These laws were meant for the most base within the group, because it was only they who could not control their natures. A truly compassionate man, who is innately so, does not need rules from above to make him behave with kindness and understanding. It is only the vulgar that need the fear of God or the pressure of a state for them to pretend to be noble and rational beings. When God and the state are eliminated as factors, then they regress back to their innate natures. And we see this often in areas where law and order has deteriorated. This is why those types are flabbergasted when someone deconstructs morality, or when one refers it back to its natural sources. For them, morality must be made something supernatural in order for them to be guided by it and to be dominated by it. They accuse those few who dare of deconstructing, of analyzing what morality is beyond the mystical and the mysterious, of being immoral, because they know that they themselves would kill and steal and hurt others if not for the Lord's decrees, and if not for the force of law and order. It is they who sense in themselves this vulgarity, this viciousness, this crassness, which fear that without a universal standard, they would return to their natural state. They feel that in themselves. One does not require a God or a law to make him act with compassion. All one needs is the ability to project self in the other, to project self in the other's position, and to find in the other a morsel of similarity to make this otherness more intimate. This is why we feel less sympathy for the worm than we do for the dog. There are less similar facts, characteristics to make us feel warmly towards the worm. Having said that, a higher mind with more refined sensibilities might be able to see itself in even a worm, which a more base mind cannot. But it can also be more precise with its discriminations of self and of otherness, which means that he can also kill a dog if his well-being or the well-being of his own kind is at risk, then never losing sleep over it. As uniformity increases, the process speeding up within social structures where uniformity is accompanied by an increase of internal order, harmony, stability, authority, what happens is that unequal and opposite reaction is produced. As the social system urges all to be the same, to be less discriminating, to be blind to differences, while selling this pseudo-individuality as its highest ideal, some few begin to fragment and separate themselves from the trend. This may happen openly, with dire consequences for those involved, or it may be more subtle, secretive, resorting to hypocrisy to mask itself within a vindictive, uncompromising leveling. You don't want to get the herd angry. Nihilism can have a negative or a positive form, just as it can have a masculine or a feminine form. Just as the number 1 and the 0 are the binary two sides of the same absolutist coin, so too does dualism manifest in seemingly opposites, which are really part of the same. Let us take the masculine form of nihilism, represented by the number 1, the singularity. This is a symbol of absolute order. Its anthropomorphic form is that of God, is the concept of God. God, or this absolute, is no more than an end to existence. One must die to gain the rare privilege of sitting in his shadow for eternity. He is often placed outside reality, into some unreality, outside existence, admitting in this way that he is non-existing. He is immutable, omnipotent, omniscient. In other words, there is nowhere to go from there. He is an end of the line. He makes consciousness superfluous. He represents inertia, the static. It is need, the sensation of the absence of an absolute, which drives organic life to procreate and then later on to redirect this energy towards creativity. Need is a decisive part of this desire to overcome, to advance, to idealize, to think. But God supposedly does not need anything, yet creates just because. Unfortunately, the act of creation and its unresolved motive exposes a flaw, a need. So the concept of God being a projection of man is a self-contradicting concept. Let us now turn to the feminine form of nihilism, symbolized by the 0, the nil, the void, the emptiness. This is a symbol of absolute disorder. In its desired end, complete randomness makes the emergence of all patterns impossible. So everything which is a pattern, such as energy, matter, the higher forms of each, such as life, are impossible, for they require consistent, repetitive, patterned behavior or ordered activity. Genes are a form of ordering. To escape this master-slave dynamic of seemingly opposites participating in a binary negation of existence, one must accept temporality or the process, the activity, with no end, as a necessity. One must begin to overcome one's own resentment of oneself and of one's own temporality and the necessity for need and suffering, as this is the experiencing of existence. One must find a balance in himself between nothingness and somethingness, a kind of limbo. Strength is a measure of weakness. Knowledge is a measure of ignorance. There is no state of omnipotence or omniscience, only varying states of weakness and ignorance. There is only degree, superiority and inferiority, lesser and greater. All these degrees are in flux themselves, and so they are altering constantly. When once you are strong in relation to another, you then become weak. Strength can also be thought of as a measure of tolerance of need suffering, or a measure of endurance. A strong man can endure a bigger weight in relation to a weaker man. To become stronger is to build your endurance to need and to suffering. Now, with the building of strength, of endurance, the same level of need, which was once very uncomfortable and tolerable, can then become more comfortable and tolerable. This is how one becomes content. One can endure more need, and so one does not suffer. The same weight lifted by a strong man is nothing, when for the weak man it is unbearable. How does one increase one's mental endurance, one's strength? In the same way one increases one's physical endurance and strength. Askesis in Greek. This word can refer to both asceticism and to exercise. We all know the benefits of training, but we neglect the training of our minds. We become so psychologically weak for that reason, due to sheltering, that the slightest exposure to reality becomes intolerable to us. We cannot endure it, so we scurry back to the sheltering comfort of our delusions, of the artificial world, of the matrix. This is how the system atrophies the human mind and turns men into children, no matter how big their muscles are, or how tall they are, or how large their dicks are. When we speak of a decline in the Western man's spirit, we mean a deterioration of his psychic endurance, feebleness of mind, a stunting of development, a psychological atrophy, a retardation. Another factor in this spiritual decline in the West is this detachment from the past, which is being promoted. Man surrenders to the immediate, the trendy, the fashionable, the popular. He becomes like a stringless kite in the wind, blown in this direction. By detaching him, this modern man, from his past, you are essentially castrating him from it. The system makes him, in this way, easy prey to the current, to the currents. It then controls and directs him in this way. This cutting away from the past is a kind of stunting, as the mind loses a vital sense of self. The past, whether you call it knowledge or experience or genetics or memetics, is a source of identity. Without this source, a mind turns elsewhere, to materialism, to hedonism, basic animalism, or towards some god who replaces his earthly absent father. Let us remember that a father is a resistant element to conformity. He is a connection to a mind's heritage, its inheritance. By getting rid of such a figure, or by emasculating this figure, turning him into a shallow metrosexual buffoon, which you can then caricature and manipulate using money and sex, you get rid of a challenging to the modern source of self-identification. Let us also recall that nature is the sum of all nurturing. Therefore, this detachment is a disconnection from one's own nature, if not from nature altogether. In other words, one's sexual identity, one's racial identity, one's tribal identity, one's bloodline, one's family. It is a diminishment of self. Once complete or near complete, such a castrated, retarded mind is desperate enough to cling onto the first semblance of order and value and identity it is given. This is the point where it becomes fully modern.